Hello, everybody. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about cognitive interviews and some of my experience with them, and hopefully help you to just get some insight on what they are and how to move forward with your interviews. So, in this time, I'm going to work to define what a cognitive interview is, go over the process of how to conduct a cognitive interview, how to develop a protocol for your interview, what the big day will look like when you conduct your interview, and then how to analyze the data once it is all collected. So the first thing I want us to do is just to think about the definition of what a cognitive interview is. So this first definition is taken from the reading that we have from Gordon Willis in his book, Analysis of the Cognitive Interview in Questionnaire Design. And he says that a cognitive interview is intended to evaluate and to improve self-report survey questions, measurement instruments, research consent forms, and other written materials. And then this can be found on page 16 of his book. Another author defined it this way. He said that a cognitive interview is a structured interaction between an interviewer and a respondent in which the respondent is asked to complete a task, such as answering a survey or exploring a dashboard, while the interviewer asks probing questions about the respondent's choices, actions, thoughts, and experiences as they complete the task. The goal is for the interviewer to gain a deeper understanding of the respondent's experience than would be possible based on the results of a survey or task alone. So I really loved this definition, and I'm going to show you where to find it if you want to pause and just read it again to yourself, or see the original source. It was taken from the California State University Educator Quality Center Cognitive Interview Protocol. But this one, I just really loved the depth and the breadth of what this is and why we're doing it. All right, now that we have a working definition of what a cognitive interview is, let's just take a brief minute to think about the process that we're going to go through to conduct this interview. So the first thing that we're going to do is draft a survey. So hopefully at this point you already have a survey draft to work with that you will be able to use for this next phase. Then you are going to administer this to somebody else. You're going question by question, item by item, and either using the strategy of a think aloud or using the strategy of probing. And we're going to talk about both of those in a minute. But for now, just knowing that you're going to use some sort of strategy as they are going through it. And then as they're taking the survey, if hopefully they have also given permission to record it, that will really help when you go back to analyze. But even regardless, if you are recording or not recording, you're going to be just taking notes as they're talking. Once survey is completed and you have all of this information, then you're going to analyze the data. Now that we have a clear definition of what a cognitive interview is, and a kind of like a stepping back, looking at the big process of how we would conduct a cognitive interview. Now we're going to get into a little bit more of the nitty-gritty. And so we're going to start by thinking about the plan of our cognitive interview, and that is called a cognitive interview protocol. So first, I'm going to hopefully take us to a page. Let's see if it'll still take us. It looks like it is. And this is where I got that definition that I had mentioned earlier. But this was tremendously helpful to me. It gave an overview of what a cognitive interview is, why you would use it, giving some ideas about preparing to conduct this interview, and then some directions for actually conducting it. So things to do beforehand, things to do during, and things like that. So I found this really helpful, and I will try to leave a PDF link for you in case you want to check that out too. But let's take a look at the one that I developed. So on my script, I just had a brief introduction. And during this introduction, I just told a little bit about myself, the study, and where I am in the process of this, and then also where their role is and what I was really hoping that I'd be able to glean from them. All right, the next part of my protocol is the warm-up. So the purpose of the warm-up activity is to model for your respondent how you want them to respond to the survey items. Because again, the purpose of the interview is to find out how they're interpreting the questions and how they're arriving at their answers. So as Willis said, we want to know why one person says yes to an item and another person says no. And not because of their perceptions or their beliefs about why they're answering the way that they're answering, but because of how the question is worded. So are they interpreting the wording of this question differently and therefore arriving at different responses because of how they're interpreting the question? So this really is about the survey and how the survey is functioning. And so this think aloud process is helping us get a little bit of an insight into how people are thinking about and how they're processing the question itself and arriving at their answer. And that's really why we want them to think aloud as they're reading through it. So almost every resource that I came across talked about this window scenario, okay? And I'm just gonna give a quick example of what they said to do, and it goes like this. So they want you to envision walking in your house, and you close your eyes and think, as I walk in the front door, I stop and I look around and there's a window above the door. So that's one window. And then there's a window to the right. And so now I'm at two windows. And then there's windows in front of me and there's two of them. So now I'm at four windows. And that just didn't jive with me. I just kind of felt like I was in a Brian Regan donut lady joke, where they're counting how many donuts you picked out and how many donuts you have left till you get to a dozen donuts. And that window scenario just was not working for me. So I decided to use the read aloud strategy. My background is I was a kindergarten, second grade teacher for many, many years. And so this very much jived with me. And I also knew that many of the people I was going to survey also had children, and that all of them had been around children and read to them. So this is this strategy that I used. And I just really talked about that process that we do when we're thinking out loud, when we're reading to a child, how we stop and think about our observations, questions we might have, connections that we're making with the setting or the characters, and really reminding people that those internal conversations that we're having with ourselves as we're reading are what we're getting at in this think aloud strategy. So thinking about your thinking, and as the respondent is taking the survey and having these internal conversations, that they speak those internal conversations out loud. So for me, that worked, and how I described what I was really hoping that they would be able to do. So the think aloud strategy is one strategy, and then Willis also mentioned probing questions. So two examples that he gave are, what to you is ethnic origin? How did you arrive at that answer? A couple other questions that I included is this clear? Is anything missing? And what do you think of this question? And the reason that I kind of went a little bit that direction is because my survey is going to faculty at research universities who publish their work and possibly disseminate it to large groups of people, including the public. And so it's a world that I'm less proficient in, and I really needed to glean insight from these experts who are in that world, that the questioning was clear, understandable, and that I wasn't missing anything blatant. So my purpose at the cognitive interview was also to make sure that I was covering everything that they understand really well in their world. Next, I created a task list for me to complete within the protocol itself. So the first thing was to create a Calendly schedule, and then to create a spreadsheet with all of the names and emails of the individuals that I was going to reach out to. And then I drafted some emails, which I'll talk about in a minute. I needed to conduct some sort of test run, and then I needed to send my email to my sample population. In a separate document, I drafted 3 emails in a Google Doc, so that way they would be handy and easy to find. So the first email was just the generic email that I sent to everybody that was just basically like, here's this survey I've created. I'm looking for participants to take the survey and be involved in a cognitive interview. Would you be interested? And in that email, I attached the Calendly link, so that way it was easy for them to schedule a time. The second email only went to people who said that yes, they were interested. And that email I sent the day before our interview, and it had a reminder of the date and time and the Zoom link. And then the third email was the thank you email that I sent the day after our interview. In my case, I conducted all of the interviews on Zoom. The con was that we didn't have that personal connection, but in my opinion, the pros far outweighed all of the cons. For one, I was able to make sure that we were only looking at one question at a time. I was also in control of like the pace and when we were moving through the survey. And then it was very easy to record. And so that was all of the reasons why I decided to do it that way. The first thing I did when we logged onto Zoom was just thank them for their time and thanked them for doing this interview. And I think the part of just thanking people and acknowledging them for the time that they're spending doing this is important, because we all have busy schedules, and anybody who is taking their time to do this cognitive interview, it's taking away from something else that they possibly need to be doing. And so just acknowledging that. Additionally, a cognitive interview isn't easy. It really requires thoughtful engagement, reflection, and some degree of vulnerability as they answer their questions. So I think it's really important just to take a little bit of time to thank people for participating in the interview. So then I just followed my protocol. So I introduce myself and the topic. I go into the role that they're going to be playing by thinking aloud as they go through the interview, as well as answering probing questions. And then I asked if it was okay that we record the session. With their permission, I clicked record, and then we started the process. So in my cognitive interview protocol, I did include pre-thought out questions that we mentioned a few slides ago with the probing questions, but I also had this as a very semi-structured interview. So I kind of just went through with the flow. As they brought up topics that I wanted to engage with more, I would pause and ask follow-up questions, or say, can we build on that? What do you think about this idea? And I just really used it as a time to like really glean as much information as I could from them and how they were looking at it, assuming that people who were similar to them, we talked about that like population and sample population, how that person might also interpret that question. So when we finished, I again thanked them for their time and asked if they had any further questions, and then also asked if they might be available for follow-up questions or anything else as we go through. And many of them said yes. So that is always really great to know if there's people you can kind of touch base with after. All right, so now we're to the point of analyzing all this data that we collected. So a cognitive interview is really a unique and interesting process because the survey instrument, the instrument itself, is really collecting quantitative data. But the process of a cognitive interview is qualitative data. So we're using this qualitative data that we collected from our cognitive interviews to inform decisions that we're going to make about improving or changing the survey instrument, which is going to collect quantitative data. So one thing to keep in mind with all qualitative data, so thinking about the cognitive interview itself and the information that we're getting from that interview, that part of it. So thinking about that qualitative data, that we have to keep in mind that we, the researchers, are intimately involved with not only the collection of that data, but also the interpretation of the data. So as Willis said, our worldview, our assumptions, our expectations, and our motivations are all going to play a part in our interpretation of the data that we collected from these interviews. Which means, as we've talked about throughout the semester, that we're bringing a risk of interjecting our own biases, prejudices, and our beliefs into the interpretations. So we really have to be aware of the central role that we play in collecting and interpreting data, but also the risks that are involved in that. So when it comes to analyzing the cognitive interview itself, we kind of just have to hold all of this in our minds as we are thinking about the edits that we're going to eventually make to the survey. So again, thinking about the information that we get from the cognitive interview, so not the administration of the survey, which is going to be quantitative data, thinking about the qualitative data from the cognitive interview, we have to keep in mind that we are not using quantitative analysis strategies. So we're not using statistical software like SPSS or R. We're not producing descriptive statistics like finding means or variances. We're not using inferential statistics with ANOVA, correlations, or regression, but we're really relying on the strategies of qualitative data. And so we're thinking about data reduction techniques that are designed to work with words. And so we're filtering through the written words and the spoken words, and we're really searching for themes and categories that are recurring throughout what one person said, but across all the interviews that we did. What are some themes across everything that we're finding? And we're taking all of that information to make important changes to the survey. So that way the function of the survey itself, once we've implemented all these strategies, that we're going to be able to have this quality instrument that then we will be able to administer to our sample population. And from them, we're going to be able to get that quantitative data that we need. And hopefully with all that data, they're going to help us answer our research question. All right, well, that is all that I have for you. Hopefully that helped to define what a cognitive interview is, to take a step back and look at the whole process of it, to take a step in and think about all the nitty-gritty by creating this protocol that you can go through in this checkoff list, and then thinking about what would the actual day of conducting an interview look like. And then once we have all of this information from our cognitive interviews, what do we do with it and how do we start analyzing it? So hopefully that just kind of gave you a little bit of a snippet of what all of those processes look like, and best of luck on your cognitive interviews. Bye.